In just the past 10 years alone, the Indo-Pacific has become a hotbed for potential conflict as regional powers battle for strategic influence. It puts Australia in a delicate but extremely critical position, especially with China. And now more than ever, our middle power status, as they call it, needs to live up to expectation. But is it? Is our Labor government, under the leadership of Anthony Albanese, capable of bolstering both economic and defence ties with Southeast Asian leaders, whilst prioritising its number one ally, the United States? Can it stand up to the growing threat of China without upsetting diplomatic relations? Most importantly, does the Prime Minister have a national security strategy that keeps us safe? It was something my dad advocated for very strongly. In fact, he drove plenty in government crazy over it, but I reckon for good reason. To answer some of these questions, to give us his take, I'm so excited to say the former Home Affairs Secretary, Michael Pezzullo, joins me now. Michael, thank you so very much.
Hello, Erin. Very good to be with you.
Now, you reached out to me this week and said that you'd reread Dad's book called Danger on Our Doorstep. I'd love to know if you think anything has really changed since he wrote it.
Well, first of all, I just wanted to take the opportunity and thank you for allowing me to come on to pay tribute to your late father, who was a very dear friend. Many of us in the security and defence community knew Jim very well. Jim did drive people hard. I wouldn't. You're his daughter, so you can say that he used to drive us mad, but I won't be so indelicate. Jim was passionate. He was forthright. He would always bend your ear, and you always knew that when you took a call from Jim as either a serving officer or once he retired, he thought about going into politics. But before he did that, he did some writing. And then, of course, he joined the Liberal Party, or at least was appointed as a senator. And you always knew with Jim, when he rang you and said, "Can I have a minute?" you knew that you were never going to get off that phone within a minute. But you always learned something. And one of the things that Jim was passionate about, it's probably fair to say that for the bulk of his military career, he was more focused on military skills, capability, strategies, etc. And of course, he spent 40 years in the military, having graduated from Duntroon, having joined in '68. But afterwards, he actually broadened his repertoire. And towards the end, and this is why it's so sad, not just for your family to have suffered the loss of Jim's untimely and early departure from this life, but he was really starting to drill into and think about national coordinated strategies. And if you read the book that he published in 2022, Danger on Our Doorstep, you might think initially a former retired Major General, it's really going to be about war and military tactics and military equipment. There's a lot of that in there. What also is in there is about the need for a nation to come together with a coherent strategy to deal with a problem that requires national involvement. And it's not just a matter for the Department of Defence and the ADF. And I know that Jim was very passionate about that, and I join him in that passion.
No, you're exactly right. And he used to explain to me the difference between a national defence strategy and the national security strategy. And this is a very sad indictment on my life at the moment. But earlier this week, I was watching on our second channel, Sky 2, I think it is, a national security forum. And there was talk there regarding the lack of a public national security strategy. And it got me thinking, do we have something that's private and secret? I know Dad used to talk about a former Prime Minister who'd say to him, "Jim, I've got it in my head." What do we have that exists currently, and what do we need, do you think?
Well, Erin, as you can imagine, as I embark on my second career as a strategic and defence analyst, I'm really not at liberty to talk about matters that I know from my government days that are still classified. I've got a lifelong obligation to protect official secrets, and I'm going to be very careful about what I say. So rather than talking about what I know to be classified, I'll put it to you this way. I think that particularly over the last decade, across both Liberal coalition and then continuing under Labor, over about 10 years, there's been what I'd call a through line of the building blocks of a national security approach. Very briefly, because I know you've got a very packed show and you've got lots of other things you want to get on and talk about, but under Mr Abbott, you had the escalation or the increase of defence funding, which had fallen quite significantly. Under Mr Turnbull, not often remembered, but some really important reforms in relation to espionage, treason offences, cybersecurity, foreign interference most particularly. And Mr Turnbull should be remembered fondly and warmly for those reforms, and they have continued. And then, of course, under Mr Morrison, a significant reset of our defence strategy in 2020 that's been built upon by this government. In the 2020 Defence Update, the government of the day under Mr Morrison said that our warning time had expired, and that's continued. That strategic premise has continued into this government. And a couple of other examples that I might proffer. Critical infrastructure, a lot of work done in the Morrison government has been in fact built upon very significantly by the Albanese government, and I want to commend the work done by my former minister, Minister O'Neill, who's done a lot of work to build on both critical infrastructure and cyber reform. So Australia as a nation, and that's across 4 prime ministers, so 3 coalition prime ministers, 1 Labor prime minister, has got what I would describe as the building blocks of a national security approach, which is quite coherent. I'm familiar with the anecdote because Jim had it in his book where he talked about a certain senior leader saying, "It's okay, Jim, I've got it in my head." I was party to his frustration at the time when he told me that anecdote, but I can speak about that a little bit more freely because it's in his book. The lesson from Jim's life and the work that he was doing towards the end is that it's no point having an assumed strategy or an implied strategy. You've got to bring it together coherently so that the public, the parliament and others can see how it all fits together in a similar fashion. And we used to have this discussion when he was a senior parliamentarian, a committee member in various committee fora that he led. We used to have this discussion about, isn't it passing strange that on the economy, and we're just about to go into a week where the budget is the centrepiece, has got a clear strategy announced by the government of the day. Yes, it's read out by the Treasurer, of course, but it is the government strategy. And there's a clear articulation, whether you agree with it or not, there's a clear articulation of what our macroeconomic strategy is, what we're doing to improve productivity, what's happening with fiscal policy, and then what's happening with the various arms of policy as they relate to the economy. And that once a year gets aggregated into a document called the budget. Yeah. It seems to me that the second co-equal with the economy is security. Those are the 2 fundamental responsibilities of any sovereign government. Secure your sovereignty and your security and have a prosperous economy. Those are the 2 most important things that governments do. If they did nothing else, you would hold them to account for those 2 things.
Michael, I could talk to you for an hour, and I'm so sorry, I'm running out of time here, but I could honestly listen to you for another hour. I thought we might get to that. Look, before I let you go...
I'm like your father, Erin. I'm bending your ear.
Well, I'm starting to get annoyed now because I would call him and he'd always say, "I've got to go in." So he's obviously spending a lot of time with people like you and not so much with me. But Michael, before you go, I just wanted to say thank you so much for your incredible service over so many years. There are reports that your Order of Australia may be stripped. I know that this is not an area you really want to get into, but I'd like to put on the record that I think you're an incredible servant of this country. You've done a phenomenal job and that should not happen. Do you have any comment on that?
Look, it's not really something that I want to talk about in detail. There is a confidential process that is, as I understand it, mandatory. I respect the fact that there's a process. I've been heartened by people's expression of support, including your very kind comments. But beyond that, I don't really have anything to add or say. Thank you, Erin, for your comments.
Michael Pezzullo, thank you so much for coming on, and I can't wait to have you on again.